I've been on a low, I've been taking my time. I feel like I'm out of my mind. It feel like my life ain't mine.
Hey everyone, welcome back. It's Project Mayday. We have Zeph and Bree, partners in crime, which is perfect because we have Ralph McGill, 45 years old, retired probationary officer of 21 years. So welcome, Ralph.
Thank you.
So Ralph, what made you get into corrections?
Well, actually, funny story. I was away at college and I had broke my foot, so I was no longer participating in athletics. So I was looking for something to fill my time. This is before internet days, so I was reading the newspaper one day and I saw an advertisement for the probation department up in Multnomah County. I applied, got the job, and about 4 weeks later, I was working in a day reporting center for sex offenders.
That must have been really enjoyable.
I'm not really sure enjoyable would be one of the words I would use to describe that, but it was definitely an eye-opening experience.
So then you started working in probation, and you told us off air that you only thought you would do it for a little amount of time. Can you explain now, 21 years later?
Right. So my plan was, originally when I finished college, I moved back home, and my mother was like, so what are you going to do? Because you can't sit here. And I was like, that was exactly my plan, was to just sit here. But at the time, two of our close family friends, one was the chief probation officer for San Mateo County, and one was the chief probation officer for San Francisco County. So she said, she spoke to them, and, as long as I did well on the civil service exam, that I would be guaranteed an interview and I could, go from there. So I put in both applications, and San Mateo was the one who called me first. And a year later, I started working at San Mateo County Juvenile Hall. So
Juvenile Hall, who was the youngest, or what age was the youngest person on probation?
So two different numbers here, actually. When I worked inside the juvenile hall, that's what's called as a group counselor, or it's equivalent to a corrections officer on the adult side. The youngest person I remember coming through there was a 9-year-old boy.
Wow.
9. Wow.
Yeah, he had done a few things at home with his siblings that required him to be removed from the home, and unfortunately, because of his age and the age of other kids at one of the local receiving homes, he couldn't go there either. So he had to come to us. Typically, you don't mix young kids with it's called 601s and 602s, offenders versus non-offenders. You don't mix those two, but because of his certain circumstances, we had to bring him into custody. So that was the youngest while I was inside the juvenile hall. But the youngest I ever had on my caseload was a 12-year-old young lady.
And what was the oldest?
I had a 70-year-old man in his 70s on my caseload who was on for beating his son-in-law across the head with a metal pipe.
And did he deserve it?
He most certainly did. But again, you can't, the law is the law.
Yeah.
So he was convicted of aggravated assault.
Yeah.
Let's just say that his conditions were a little bit different than everyone else's.
Sure.
Particularly after I read the facts of the case.
So you got young and old and everything in between, and you're hearing all these stories. I mean, does that ever affect you personally? Or anybody that you worked with?
It definitely affected the people that I worked with. And until I had kids, I didn't think that it affected me at all. But after the birth of my first child, starting to realize that these are things that could happen to anyone at any time. It doesn't matter, where you've been raised, how much money your family has. It really boils down to the environment that you're raised in and the people that come and go in that environment and how they affect the kids in that environment. It really changed my way of thinking and my perception of what it meant to be on probation and how probation officers and our group supervisors, correction officers interacted with these kids. It really made me take it more personal, I guess, is the best way to describe it. And then try to, you have to have that thick skin to work in this environment.
Yeah.
But once you have kids and you start to realize the things that other families go through for their kids and with their kids, it takes that thick skin and it creates openings in there to allow for your feelings to show. And, that can be a good thing or a bad thing.
What about Ralph, pre-father as opposed to Ralph, the father now, like going into it, planning to have children and then doing your job and actually being a father? Do you think that there was any difference between the two? Or do you feel like you kind of had the plan going into it and you kind of stayed true to the course?
I think the difference is how I responded after the fact.
Yeah.
Going into someone's home, removing a child, placing a child, taking them into custody, all that was the same across the board. But I think it was the reactions and the emotions that came after the fact that changed. Before, if I had to go into a probationer's home and remove them from their parents for whatever reason, and there was, no big deal. I'd hit the bar afterwards and go hang out with my friends for 4 hours and think nothing of it.
Yeah.
That's pre-fatherhood. Post-fatherhood, it hits you a whole nother way because you understand what those parents are going through, and you can sympathize with what the kids are going through because you're not seen as you're doing what's best for everyone.
Yeah.
You're seen as the person ripping that family apart. And that can take a toll on a person.
Definitely.
Yeah. So why did you stay for 21 years?
Why did I stay for 21 years?
Did you love it that much? Did you love being a probationary officer?
I fell into a rut. So I did 8 years inside the Juvenile Hall. And then from there, I was promoted to a probation officer, and I did my first 4 years working in the high school as a SRO, school resource officer. From there, I moved to various different assignments inside juvenile and the adult division. It just, I started with the idea of I'll do the first year, see what it's like, and if I like it, I'll stay. After the first year, I was like, okay, you're vested in the retirement system after 5 years. I'll do 5 years, and then I'll make my decision of what I want to do after that. It was 7 years before I realized, oh, hell, I passed my 5-year mark. What am I going to do? So at that point, it was like, okay, before we got our current retirement system, you could max out that retirement system after 20 years. So I said, you know what? I started at 22. I can retire at 42, walk away and do something else. I said, okay, fine. I'm committing right now. I'll do this 20. And then when I hit the 20-year mark, I'll reevaluate. 21 years later, I retired.
So, Ralph, within those 20 years of working in probationary services, how did that impact you in your home life and your relationships?
Wow. So there were good days, there were bad days, and there were terrible days. A good day, I would do whatever shift was required for that day, that week, depending on how many homes I needed to see or how many arrests needed to be made. And then you go home and you do your best not to bring work home with you. Those are the good days. The bad days, you got to talk about it. And you need someone to bounce this off of. And luckily for me, my wife is the kind of person that is willing to sit and listen to me and let me get things off my chest. But then there were those bad days, those worst days where it's don't talk to me. I got to process this first before I can say anything to you. Otherwise, I'm going to take this out on you, and that's not fair. Granted, it took me a while to realize I was doing that. Yeah. And to her credit, I have no scars or bruises to show for it. But it takes when you go to a house where you're called, the older brother's on probation, so technically all you can do is address the older brother's situation. But you see 5 younger siblings who look like they haven't eaten anything in a week, who smell like they haven't bathed in a month, and there's you step on the floor and you hear the squish sound of wet carpet and the smells that arise from it. There were times where I stopped and said, you know what, I'm not going in there. And it was for the protection of myself and for those in there. Because, honestly, you want to be professional at all times. But when it comes to kids, particularly after being a parent, when it comes to kids, when you see them in this situation and you're like, what the hell? Yeah. But the adult has brand new Jordans on, fresh shoes, a haircut, a gold chain, and there's a Lexus in the driveway. It really pisses you off. Yeah. But there's not a whole lot you can really technically say about it without getting in trouble yourself. So you internalize a lot of that, and then you find an opportunity to push it out and get rid of it. And unfortunately, most of the time, that's when you get home, and it's your wife and your spouse or your kids who unfortunately get the brunt of that, and that is completely and totally unfair.
Yeah. Do you find it's harder in working in the state of California, especially with the youth and the family environment? I know you kind of deal with the after the fact, like me and G and Bree, we kind of the first responder type role. As I tell this story all the time, and I will never ever forget it. But we went to, it was a lift assist, and it was for a grandma, and she needed help picking her grandkid up out in a pasture where wild animals were, horses and stuff. They weren't wild, domestic, but horses and stuff. But she had such a bad back and kyphosis that she wasn't able to actually pick the grandkid up. And so we were out there and we picked the kid up and we're like, where's this kid's mom? And she's like, oh, she's inside. So we go into the home, and it's kind of like how you just described, which is kind of what brought this to me. Wet carpet, there was a hole in the floor, broken glass everywhere, dirty dishes in the sink. And we walk into the bedroom, and the mom is laying on her back on the bed with her feet on the floor, and she's covered in probably 1,000 flies. And she was just laying there, and she just let the flies crawl on her, didn't move at all, and we thought she was dead. And we're like, ma'am, and she sits up, and all the flies just flying everywhere, right? So of course we called Child Protective Services and all this stuff, and then they come out and they determined, they were like, well, there's running water because the sink works. There is some edible food in the fridge. And the kids have a place to sleep, a bed, even though it was in the living room.
There's 4 walls.
Exactly. And there's a roof. So there was nothing that could be done. So for us as first responders, it's very, very frustrating because we see these situations and we're like, man, I wouldn't wish this upon my worst enemies. But then, you are finally working with the people who actually break through this California wall that we see. And I can only imagine some of the stories that you've heard and or seen firsthand.
Yeah.
I
don't know about the ethics of this, but there were times where we would violate kids' probation just to get them out of a situation like that. They hadn't technically done anything wrong, but we would find something to justify that violation. So for at least the next 72 hours, we knew that they were fed. We knew that they were clothed. We knew that they would take a shower. So yeah, those situations are just heartbreaking. Is the easiest way to explain it. Frustrating, aggravating, annoying, painful, and disgusting is probably one of the better ways to say it. But I mean, like you said, there's running water, food in the fridge, and 4 walls and a roof. So technically, they're not neglected. And it's terrible. It's absolutely terrible.
Yeah, if we didn't ask the right questions on that call, we would have never even known.
Right.
It came down to the grandma saying, eventually just talking to her while we were picking the kid up, she was just like, she has 3 kids, and the oldest daughter, we don't know where she is. We haven't seen her in 2 weeks. And we're like, excuse me? So then that's just kind of what actually...
red flag.
Exactly. Yeah. And we started digging a little deeper, and then we walk inside and find this lady covered in flies. But I mean, it's crazy. It's crazy sometimes. But it is sad that sometimes you have to keep these kids in that environment to protect them from the environment that they're being raised in.
Right. It's no one wants to put... Well, okay, correction. There were sometimes I was like, you need to go to jail. But, I mean, on average, no one wants to remove the kid from their home. Right. No one wants to may have a kid kicking and screaming, "Mom, mom, mom,
Yeah.
don't let him take me." That's not the goal.
No.
Right.
But unfortunately, sometimes that's what needs to occur in order for that kid to have a better chance.
Yeah.
Yes.
Sometimes mom and dad just aren't it.
Yep.
So how do you think this plays an effect on mental wellness for specifically probation?
Oh, wow. So I used to have the stats on this. I don't anymore. But about 4 or 5 years ago, we had a very high rate of undiagnosed depression, not only within our department, but within the greater probation family. And it took me a minute to step back and realize that when what we considered detoxing and going to, relieve our stress was sometimes more dangerous than going into the homes we were going into.
Yeah.
I mean, let's go bungee jumping. Let's go drinking and then go bungee jumping. Let's spend 4 hours at this bar and then 3 hours at this bar. And then let's go bungee jumping. I mean, it was, so it took a really big toll, I think, mentally on everyone that I can remember working with. Several have since passed, but when I go back and look at them, they were all alcoholics. They were all very high strung, and the only way they could relax was with a bottle in their hand. So I think not being able to have some place to decompress all of this in a healthy fashion, in a healthy manner, weighs heavily on, even though the young folks might not see it, they might not feel it right now. Wait 10 or 15 years and have a couple of stories and removals and your belt, and you're going to start to realize, wow, this affects me a lot more than I thought. And it's tough because as an industry, we're not built to deal with our stress.
Yes.
We're not built to deal with what happens to us after these interactions. We provide every service known to man to our clients and their families, but we don't look after us in the same manner. And that leads to some seriously unfortunate consequences.
Yeah, they teach you what to do, but not how to deal with it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. There is no module at the academy to deal with depression. There is no module at the academy to deal with suicidal thoughts or tendencies. There's how do you know you're becoming an alcoholic? There is no LD for that. So,
even in the EMT book, there's one chapter on EMT wellness, and it's like, don't drink a lot of caffeine, exercise regularly, eat healthy. I'm like,
yeah. What is this, an Atkins advertisement? It's like, this isn't going to help.
Exactly.
And we really need to address that across the board for first responders and law enforcement, because we lose not only to death and suicide, but just, I've had enough, I can't do this anymore.
Yeah.
We lose so many quality people because we don't know how to take care of ourselves.
That's right. There's no amount of salad you can eat that's going to take care of that problem.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
So what finally pushed you to retire?
Well, for me, it was a combination of things. One of the big things was, so the county that I work for is one of the most expensive counties in the country to live in. 95% of our department was driving an hour or more to get to and from work. So where I had moved so far away that it took me 2.5 hours to get into work in the morning and sometimes 5 hours to get home.
Wow.
So it was like, you know what? I can't keep doing this. So, and what we decided to do was I would spend the week at a friend's house or at my parents' house and stay the week and then just come home on weekends. That doesn't work well when you have a young family. The time away, the stress of missing, holidays, birthdays, trick-or-treating, school meetings, putting all that on one parent just isn't fair. So that was one reason. Another reason was my department's response to one of our probation officers' suicides. Granted, this was the first time that we had experienced an on-duty death. But to me, the response just was not where it should have been. It felt forced. It felt it didn't feel genuine to me. And it felt like to remain there was continually to hurt not only myself but everyone else, because I was so still pissed off about it that it affected the interactions that I was having with everyone else.
Yeah.
And also the direction that my unit, so I was in charge of the training unit. The direction my unit was going was they wanted to take it versus direction that I thought that it needed to go were in conflict with each other. And instead of, now you should be polite to your supervisor. And I tried to do that as often as possible. I will not say that I was as often as possible. So I saw that getting worse, and I was like, you know what? Let's put all these together and decide whether or not this is worth me staying, and it wasn't.
So you had this accumulation of stress.
Correct.
So let's talk about the suicide. Did they bring in counselors to diffuse or talk about, really, when this happens within a certain agency, you would think there would be a lot of proactive things happening and discussion.
Or did they treat it like an aberration? Like this is once in it. Obviously, there's no history of it. So, this must be something that he was dealing with and they didn't take it as seriously as you wanted it.
So I don't think they knew what to do. At first it was, if you need to talk to someone, call this number.
Okay.
Then it was, we'll have somebody here on Tuesday from 1 to 4 if you want to talk. Then it was, okay, so why don't we pull every unit that interacted with them together and let them talk to somebody and talk to a counselor to see if they had anything on their chest. This is over the course of 6 or 7 months. And it's like, granted, I don't know what to do either, but I know this isn't right.
Yeah. It just sounds like they're playing catch up at this point.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. They're like, we'll do the minimum and then, that's not good enough. We'll do a little more and then a little more and then a little more.
Right.
Yeah.
If someone would complain, we'll do this. If no one complains, well, then we must be doing a good job.
Yeah.
And for me, it just didn't, the response wasn't genuine. It wasn't as if we understand your pain, we feel your pain, take time to heal from your pain. It was, okay, yes, this happened. We're sorry this happened. We don't want it to happen again, but be sure you hit your numbers for this month. It wasn't, again, we had never experienced this before. There was no playbook for this. There was no, this is A happens, so we do B, C, F, and G. There was none of that. Everyone was shooting from the hip.
Yeah.
But to me, all those shots missed.
Yes.
So I still don't know what. Well, I have ideas of what could have been done better, but
what would be your ideas? What would you have preferred, looking back? And how many years has it been now?
About 3 years now.
Okay, so 3 years ago, for you personally to process this in a healthy way, what would you have preferred to happen? Would they say you don't have a choice? You're going, here is your therapist, and here you go?
I actually think that probably would have been the best course of action, because I don't see myself saying, hey, I need to talk to somebody.
Yeah.
That's not one of my strong points.
Right.
But I had worked with this particular gentleman. We went through instructor school together, so we had been instructing together for 20 years. And granted, our unit was off after 6 months. Our unit was offered the services of a counselor. But did anyone ever approach me individually and say, hey,
right,
I think you need to sit down and have a conversation with somebody to help you work through some of this stuff? That never occurred.
Right.
So it's like, so who am I mad at? Am I mad at myself for not taking those steps to do that? Or am I mad at the department for not saying, hey, you need to do this, and this is a requirement we're going to have of you before you can continue on working and doing those things? I think it's a combination of both.
Yeah.
But I'll be honest with you, I'm more mad at the department than I am at myself.
Yeah. Do you feel like
I just feel...
Sorry, do you feel like it was just you who felt that way, or was that the sentiment amongst anybody else that you talked to, or did everyone just kind of keep to themselves and not say anything?
I'd say for the first 4 or 5 months, a lot of folks kept to themselves about it, except for the funeral. Of course, there was a lot of talk during the funeral, but after that, No one really said anything for the next 3 or 4 months. It took a group of us going to away to a training, and one of the questions in the training was, how has your department dealt with an emergency or situation that isn't ordinary? And there are like 7 or 8 of us in there, and we all looked at each other like, well, there's really only one thing that meets that requirement. And I think at that training, we had more therapy and more ability to get it off of our chest than we ever had with the department. And I think it was probably right around that time I was like, you know what? I can't be here anymore.
Yeah. Do you think it's because in your training environment, they asked you? I mean, instead of being like, hey, there's going to be a therapist if you want, versus it was like, what has happened in your opinion where they are forcing you to answer, and there's an environment to even have that conversation, which is, I mean, the whole point of us, Project Mayday, right? Yeah. It's like, we need to talk about things and connect as human beings. Committing suicide is not natural, right?
No, not at all.
Things have led up to the point of someone feeling hopeless. And in your case, right, you had a close coworker friend, and then it falls on deaf ears. And how many more do we have to see to start talking about it? Right? It's proven that people are suffering.
Yeah. It's like you look anywhere in nature, it's like animals don't really commit suicide. Like,
don't do that.
No, that's
not natural. Yeah, exactly. And I mean, I understand to a point some of the reaction of our upper management and our executive level. I mean, yes, you still have a department that needs to be run.
Absolutely.
You still have a department that needs to meet certain goals. I understand that. But there has to be the human element to it as well.
Yes.
Don't come to me a month and a half later and say, hey, have all those classes been covered?
Right.
No.
Right.
That's probably not the best thing to say to me.
Yeah.
Shoot me an email or something. Particularly if you know I'm not a fan of you.
Yeah.
So I mean, I get it, but I just don't agree with it, and I don't understand. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And we did a podcast with a U.S. Marine Corps warrant officer, and he was saying in the military, the Marines, they do a yearly mental health training.
Mandatory.
Wow.
Even for the people teaching the course, they have to take the course. So it's not good enough that you teach it. You literally have to take it as well.
That is outstanding.
Right. And so I said, I'm like, why isn't the civilian world catching up to the military? The military usually they're the leaders and so many things. And it's really interesting because if you had that training and you developed a space where people can talk and it's comfortable to be like, you know what, I actually probably need a counselor, or, ooh, those things you're talking about, that's triggering me. We can do prevention instead of damage control.
Yeah.
Exactly. That would be ideal. I mean, every year we have mandatory training classes. We have to take 40 hours of training every year. Make it 48 hours and include that 8-hour mandatory mental health checkup update every year.
That's right.
That would be absolutely ideal.
Yeah, it's sad because it's like we take supposedly, the best parts of the military, structure, organization, span of control, all these deals. But when it comes to mental health and suicide prevention and mandatory trainings, towards those topics, it's like, we can't afford unions and, it's
right. We don't have time for that.
Yeah.
Who's going to pay for it? Who's going to cover the work while everybody's out at this additional training?
Exactly.
Sometimes the work just doesn't get done.
Yeah.
Right.
You'll tell me to stop working if it falls into overtime. But you don't want me to stop working if I have to go to a training.
Exactly.
You can't have it both ways.
Yeah.
Right.
So absolutely.
We'll pay for you to take this class if it specifically helps to the department. But if it helps you mentally get better, well, you're going to have to pay for that on yourself.
You might want to take a day off and take that class.
Yeah, exactly. And you're going to have to find your own coverage.
Exactly. Exactly.
I think there's so much about, the culture that we really want to highlight. If you had to give advice to anyone going into probation, so you now did a career change, now you teach, What advice would you give to your students about entering into this type of career field?
Or anybody who's going into corrections?
So my first and foremost, I would say, be sure that you take care of yourself. You cannot help your partner. You cannot help the lady on the street. You cannot help the little kid in that house if you yourself are not okay. So, take that splinter out of your eye before you worry about the pole in that other person's eye. So that's first. Second, I would say you definitely need to have a thick skin, because people are going to say things to you that are going to hurt your soul, but you have to remain professional at all times.
Yep.
I've been spit on. I've had feces thrown at me. I've had period products thrown at me. I've had food. I've been bit, kicked, punched, had a knife pulled on me, had a gun pulled on me, you name it. But you have to stay professional.
Yeah.
And then I would also say you got to have a sense of humor. If you're not able to laugh at some of this stuff, you're going to go crazy. So along with having a healthy outlet for the stress, a good sense of humor is gonna carry you a long way.
Well, thank you so much, Ralph. The last part of our podcast is called 5 Rapid Fire. In Rapid Fire, you weren't given these questions and you answer in one word or one phrase.
Okay.
Okay, are you ready?
Yep. I'm going to be asking you those questions, but I'm going to go off script real quick. I got to know the story. Who threw feces at you? I just got to know. What happened?
It was a young lady.
A young lady. All right. That's not what I was picturing.
She had barricaded herself in her room and covered the window, which is a security risk because we don't know what you're doing in there. We don't know if you're harming yourself. We don't know anything. So we were tasked with removing her from her room and taking her to one of our isolation units. We opened the door. She's standing in the corner with her back away from us. No big deal. We call her name a couple times, say, hey, we need you to step out, turn around, back up towards us so we can handcuff and escort you out. She turns around. She's got 2 handfuls full of whatever she could pull out of the toilet.
Oh, my goodness.
I'm not first in line, but I'm second in line. She cocks back to throw it. It hits the guy in front of me. He turns around and looks at me and goes, she just threw shit at me. And as I look at him, smack, it hits me dead on my chest. And I'm like, oh hell no. Okay. So we get her cuffed up, we get her removed, and I'm like, yo, the department is buying me a new jacket and a new shirt. I don't care who you have to fight to get it, but you guys are buying me a new jacket and a new shirt.
I don't know how you stay professional, but you are a bigger man than me, my friend. I tell you, when someone throws judo at me, we're going to have some words. I guarantee it.
It was not easy.
All right. 5 rapid fire questions. You ready?
Ready.
All right, let's do this. If you can live in a movie, what movie would it be?
Alien.
Okay, I know it's one word or one phrase, but aliens? Why?
Aliens.
Why?
I love that movie and the ability to shoot indiscriminately and not get in trouble for it. Are you kidding?
That was so fast.
It was. There's no hesitation whatsoever. Aliens.
None.
Okay. Aliens jumping out your chest. You're not worried about nothing. You just want to be able to.
No.
Right.
I just.
My bad. I'm breaking my own rules.
I just want to put them down.
All right. If you had to describe yourself as an animal, what would it be?
Ooh. Can I ask my wife?
No. How would you describe yourself?
Myself.
What's your spirit animal?
Wolf.
Okay.
Wolf. I like it.
That's a good one.
If someone wrote a book about your life, what would the title be?
Oh, geez. Comedy with tears.
A comedy with tears.
Oh,
I like
I
that.
like that.
That's good. All right. If you, sir, came with a warning label, what would that warning be?
Oh man, does not play well with others.
All right. Last question. Last one. Number 5. One word to describe your mental health.
One word.
One word or phrase, I guess.
Improving.
Improving.
Oh, that's good. That's
I
good.
like it. I like it.
All right, Ralph. Well, thank you so much for coming on. I love hearing your stories, and
My pleasure.
We just thank you so much.
Yes.
I've had a blast. Thank you for having me.
This is probably one of the first ones where my cheek hurt.
I know.
From laughing so damn much, man.
All right. This is Project Mayday. Call out.
Call out.